Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that gives you a peek inside the minds of some truly inspirational teachers. This week, I'm joined by Cassie Young, and we're going to talk about all things special educational needs. Hi, Cassie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's very early in the morning.
So we look at our guests in numbers just to get a feel for who they are, and response with numbers, obviously. My first question is years as a teacher.
I actually had to sit down and think about this. Tell it's holidays. 8 years as a teacher.
Years as a head teacher?
Nearly 6, so 5.5. I almost made it to 6, but I started in a weird term and finished in a weird term, so 5.5.
First year group taught?
Year 3.
Last year group taught?
A 4-5 mix.
Most important year group?
Reception.
Favorite year group?
I feel like I need to explain that, but I'll explain after, maybe. Favorite year group? Year 2.
Tweets?
Is that how many tweets I've done?
It is, yeah.
That's embarrassing. 25,000. Is that that's a lot?
It is a lot, but it's maybe 120,000 less than the record for a guest response. So you're still
okay. I feel so much better now. I feel like that's nearly 12 years of tweets, though. But I won't say that I didn't use Twitter for the first probably 5 years. But yeah, that's a lot.
Solid. I think you're really proactive on Twitter and having conversations with people, so I think that's absolutely fair enough.
Thank you for making me feel better about that. The most important year group is reception. I just think you've got to get it right there. And I think that's why it's the most important year group. I was made a phase leader of reception in Key Stage 1, and I'd actually only ever taught in Key Stage 2. And I felt like I really had to prove myself, because the teachers in there were like, "You've never worked in reception. How on earth can you be the phase leader?" And it was, I had a lot to prove. So I spent a lot of time in reception and Key Stage 1 before I went into work in year 2. And it's just incredible. It's an incredible place. And I think reception teachers definitely don't get enough kudos for what they do. And I've just seen the impact that they can have. You've got children that back in the day on the old Development Matters, you had children coming in at 22 to 36 months, and these children left kind of working and flourishing above their own age when they got to year 6. And I think it all started in reception. So I think it is probably the most important year group. I don't know if that's surprising or not, really.
I think whenever I first wrote that question, I was expecting lots of year 6s as an answers, but like I say, it's very popular for people to say reception is the most important year group. So I think it sort of shows how switched on, the people I just happen to have asked to come in for interviews are, because I'm 100% with you on that there. If you do it right early, you save yourself a whole lot of time and intervention later on, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And they're just so on it, and they make huge amounts of progress. And you think, some children come in and you think, how on earth are they, ready for school? My own daughter, she was 2 weeks into being 4 when she started, and I cried as I passed. She didn't look back. On the day that I thought that she would be devastated, she didn't even look back. She just skipped into school. We were like, oh, she's going to be fine, but I wasn't fine. And the progress she made was huge, and they just work incredibly hard, and they're constantly changing the environment and thinking about, not only they're talking about all of the areas of learning, their physical development, as well as kind of academic achievement, and making sure that they're all engaged and they've all got things to do all of the time. And it's exhausting. I've seen, I have worked in reception, I've covered people and spent a lot of time in a reception class, and also nursery as well. I would say it's the most important year group. I was going to say that my favourite year group is year 2. I love year 2. I don't know why. I think it's because they're kind of at age where they can start to, you know, that you can hold conversations with them and they're really curious about everything, and you can get them really whipped up and excited about and interested in pretty much anything. But they're also another year group that just make loads of progress, and you can have a real impact with them, and they've still got that kind of silly giggly kind of, you know. I remember taking a class on a school trip when I worked in London, and we went on the underground, and I had 30 children basically in the doorway of the tube, and I just looked down at them, and it was like the little aliens in Toy Story. They're all just like jiggling around on this tube, and I was thinking, I feel very, very responsible right now, but they just lovely, and it's just a lovely age to work with.
Nice. Yeah, my youngest is summer born, so he's May, so he's in reception. He's not going to be 5 until next May, and the progress he's made since going to school is phenomenal. You know, considering he spent most of his nursery in lockdown. So I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's exciting when they come back and they, you know, they've got their phonics sounds, and they're, you know, starting their, you know, name writing, and they're verbalizing things that they've been doing at school, and you think, yes, this is it. You can tell that they're getting, you know, a decent deal here, because they want to come in and talk about it. It's when you start saying, what have you done today? Can't remember. Nothing. You just think, oh, here we go.
So you're a teacher, head teacher, and are about to take on a new role with a focus on special educational needs across a multi-academy trust. Tell us about your journey and how you got here.
I always wanted to be a teacher, and I have absolutely no idea where that came from, which is quite interesting. I didn't have like an inspirational teacher that I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. I just kind of always knew that I wanted to go into teaching. I didn't go into teaching straight away. I felt that I needed to have a bit of life experience and try different things out before I committed to it completely, but it was something that I always knew I wanted to do, so that I didn't feel that there was this massive rush to go into it. So I went travelling when I was 20 for a year, and then I worked in a nightclub for about 20 years, actually, on and off through university and through work, and had always worked from the age of about 14. I've always had a job and stuff, and then I moved to London. I did my degree in Brighton. I did a philosophy and history degree. I didn't do a teaching degree. I did go and look actually at doing a teaching degree, and I got accepted. And then I went and did like a taster session for this philosophy and history degree. And I just absolutely loved the kind of discussions that were happening, and the thought processes, and the opportunities for reflection. And I thought, actually, I really want to do something that interests me and I'm passionate about, and I don't want to go into a teaching degree and get sort of 3 years in, because I think it was a 4-year degree at that point. And I just thought, actually, I don't want to lose the passion for it before I've even started. I have got a tendency to kind of switch off things and get bored really easily and kind of lose interest quite quickly. So I was quite aware, even at that age, that that was a possibility. So I thought, actually, let's just do this degree. And I absolutely loved it. So I did that. And then I moved to London and did my PGC in Kingston. And then I stayed in London for about 12 years. I just loved London. I loved the busyness and the pace of it. And I loved working in an inner city school. So I worked in South London. Then I moved back to Hastings when I had my daughter. So we moved back. And before I'd left, the SENCO at my previous school was going to retire. And she said, look, I think that you'd be really good at this. And I hadn't even considered being a SENCO at that point. And I was really shocked that she'd asked me, actually, because she was just this amazing woman. She had the patience of a saint. And, you know, we were all quite young teachers, and we just thought, she's coming with some more paperwork for us to fill in. Oh, she's going to make us do this, another intervention, and she's going to make us, you know, sit and have all these meetings. And we used to try and avoid her, which is awful. We used to try and avoid her. And she used to just follow us around, come and sit here and do this. And she just was this incredible woman. She used to do every intervention across the school, and her timetable must have been absolutely jam-packed. And I used to watch her with some of our most vulnerable children, and she would just calm them down with her voice, and she would work so incredibly hard, and these children would just transform. And I just thought, if I ever had kind of an ounce of that, I'd be an incredibly lucky person. And yeah, she approached me, she said, you know, you're going on maternity leave, have you considered doing the SENCO qualification while you're off? like it was like I was about to have a year off, you know. And she said, you know, I think you'd be really good at this. And I thought, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's have a look at it. So while I was on maternity leave, I went to Roehampton and did my national SENCO qualification, and that was great. It was part of a Merton hub, so we would work at Perseid Special School. So we'd do work experience there, and we'd kind of learn the ropes and look at the practice that was going on at special schools. And then we would go to Roehampton as well. I got my qualification, and then the job came up at Brenzett, which was a 2-day-a-week SENCO position. And I thought, yeah, that's great. That's, you know, I can learn about the job, and it's part-time, so I can still be at home. And then I started there, and then that very quickly became a 3-day-a-week job, and then an assistant head role. So I was a class teacher, a SENCO, a DSL, and part-time. And then within about 6 months, the leadership changed, and they asked me to take on the head of school role. So I was doing it full-time, 4 days a week, and that was quite a challenge, because the school was in special measures, and I had a lot of plates to spin at that point. And I was also 4 days a week, but really working 5 in the classic, you're part-time, but you're full-time really. And I had Rita must have been 18 months old. So my daughter was only tiny as well. And looking back, I think, how on earth, how on earth did I do that? But I did. Yeah, that's how I ended up in that role. It was purely kind of by accident. And kind of, yeah, let's give it a go, actually. And it's one of the most fulfilling, I'd say SENCO is one of the most fulfilling roles that you could possibly do, because you have the privilege of working with some extraordinary children that show you kind of what positive behaviours and determination and courage, and that's children from all ages, from reception up to year 6 at the moment. And it feels like an absolute honour to work with some of these children, and the progress that they make and the determination they show is incredible. I think I've probably learnt more from children than I have from adults at different points in my career. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing job.
Yeah, my overriding sort of thought here is, how on earth did you do half that stuff with the, you know, either while on maternity leave or with very young children? You know, that's amazing. Hands down.
I think that I ended up just being incredibly organised, and actually through the beginning of my teaching career, I was not particularly organised. Everything's last minute, and everything was a bit kind of haphazard, but I got through it. And then I think I sat down and thought, you know, if I am actually going to do these roles, and the danger is that you take on, especially in small schools, you take on so many different roles. And then you end up not doing any of them particularly well. And I was absolutely determined that was not going to happen, because particularly when you're a DSL, on top of everything else, you can't allow that to happen, because that's when, you know, you get into kind of dangerous territory of missing things, or things falling through the net, or you know that bit of paperwork that needed to go off is vitally important, and it hasn't been done. Or, you know, when you're doing annual reviews or putting together kind of EHCP assessments, or you know, anything like that, if you miss things or you put them to the bottom of the pile, you know, you could be 6 months on a waiting list later than you originally were, and that's no good for anyone. I just lived and died by my diary and making sure that everything's in. And I think one thing that, and it's such a small thing that I do, but if I have a meeting, I will write it up and send it immediately. Or if I've said I'm going to send you that, I'll write it in my diary, send it immediately while I'm either still in the phone call or having the conversation, or I won't leave until I've done it. And just really small little things like that, and actually blocking my diary out. So for completing paperwork, because paperwork is the bulk of it, unfortunately. So actually putting in my diary, you know, I'm blocking out that morning because I'm going to be doing that piece, or I'm going to be having that meeting, and just blocking out a whole morning, giving myself enough time. But yeah, it was just a lot of juggling, and also saying when things were too much. I had an amazing executive head teacher who I could just call, probably just cry at and say, I can't, things need to stop for a minute. I need to catch up. And having an incredible team around me who would pick up the slack, or they would take things off me. I think I learned a lot about myself as a leader. We're all quite controlling in education. We all like to do things ourselves because it's quicker and it's done the way you want it to be done. And even as a classroom teacher, you know, you'd get, you know, someone would come to cover your class and you think, I'd rather you didn't, I'd rather just do it myself. And I've learned that actually you can't do everything, and actually you do need to give up a bit of control sometimes, and you do need to delegate because the workloads are huge and you can't do everything yourself.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned life experience at the start, because I often wish that I'd had a job that in an office before I became a teacher, because I went straight from university into the classroom, and it was the mistakes I was making were the mistakes you probably learn if you've had an office-based job, you know, like write things down during meetings because you won't remember everything and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I think it makes total sense in terms of, you know, you learn to be organized by doing it.
I worked for Orange Mobiles. So I worked in a nightclub, and then I worked. So I got to learn to deal with difficult people. Drunk adults are very similar to children. So, you know, and working with some real difficult characters, and, you know, having to negotiate and kind of and work while really, you know, absolutely exhausted. I mean, I used to work crazy, like 7 in the evening till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then start again. You know, I'd work in a bar during the day and then work in the nightclub in the evening, and it, you know, you end up in this crazy sort of working this fuzz. So when I started working in schools, I was like, actually, this is all right. I'm working and it's daytime, like this is a shocker. But also worked for Orange, so worked in kind of business sector. And when I moved up to London, I moved from the Hastings store up to Oxford Street, and that was a complete change of pace. And it was all about making money and getting commission, and it wasn't like that in Hastings. It was very much like, if you sell a phone, great. In London, it was like, if you don't sell a phone, you are going to be hauled over hot coals, and that kind of pressure and accountability suddenly went through the roof. And I loved working in London. I loved working in Oxford Street, and I met people from all walks of life, and just loved it, absolutely loved it. But you're right, I did learn an awful lot about working with adults and working with kind of, yeah, that pressure and accountability, and being able to justify your decisions. And, you know, and even though it was a simple job, I mean, here, do you want a phone? You probably need one. It's quite an easy sell. But you would also deal with complaints, and people just, you know, people get really funny about buying things, don't they? So yeah, I think I learned a lot from that as well.
So I think the focus of this episode is going to be special educational needs. I think it makes sense to define what we mean in terms of the parameters of this particular chat. So what do we mean when we say special educational needs going forward?
I think we are talking about children with educational needs above or different from their peers, that we're talking about mainstream classrooms, because that's the sector that I work in is mainstream school. So I think when we're talking about special educational needs, it's different to or additional, different from or additional to.
Excellent. And I think that, yeah, whenever we were preparing for this, the distinction was that we're not necessarily going into the realm of profound and complex needs, you know, that a special school might experience. So I think that's really useful, largely because it can be quite an understandably emotive topic. And yeah, in the interest of approaching this as sort of sensibly as possible, I think, yeah, we know the remit in which we're discussing. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that we do have children that have profound and complex needs in mainstream schools. And I think more and more schools are becoming adept and seeing more complex needs coming into schools and having to learn more than they ever have before about, you know, supporting these children. It's become quite and I think that, you know, what we were talking about earlier, saying that actually sometimes these conversations are difficult, it's because there is a lack of kind of understanding about some of the needs that are coming into mainstream schools, and people get very concerned that they're not meeting these children's needs quickly enough, or they're leaving it too late, and the issues kind of become amplified. So I think, yeah, when we're discussing today, it's more kind of general special educational needs, and that doesn't mean general is a one size fits all, because everyone's experience of special educational needs and pupils with different and additional needs are unique to that child. And that's the difficulty in some ways, that you can't generalize because everyone has their own experience.
I mean, it probably seems really obvious, but why is the highest standard of special educational needs education essential at our phase?
I think you have to get it right as early as possible. And if you've got high standards for our most vulnerable learners, and when I say vulnerable learners, and I've said this when I've done talks at kind of conferences, we're talking about vulnerable learners, not necessarily children that are lower attaining children. They are vulnerable to missed learning opportunities, because we know that we've got children in our class that might have a special educational need, but they are working way above kind of their peers. It doesn't necessarily mean because a child's got a special educational need that they are a lower attaining or have particular, you know, that they might have difficulties with communication, but they are working alongside or above their peers in the classroom. So they're vulnerable to kind of missed learning opportunities. And I think if you raise your kind of expectations and your standards on all children, then all children are going to benefit from that. So you do have to get it right, and you do have to have, you know, there has to be that essential kind of expectation, and you have to get it right in terms of early intervention and getting it right from the start, so that they're not playing catch up, or you're not losing children in the system of waiting lists, or waiting until they're in key stage 2 and then thinking, oh yeah, this child's had difficulties from reception, but actually they're kind of bobbling along. So, you know, but actually I don't think they're going to cope very well at secondary school, so let's start getting things in place now. It's not that it's too late to do that, but if you are aware of a child that is struggling and needs kind of scaffolding and support, or some kind of other agency involvement, then do it as early as you've noticed it. That's why I think, you know, and I'll harp on about reception, but things like phonics interventions, no, not phonics interventions, phonics, being taught phonics is a really good indicator and a really good marker to kind of work out if early intervention is, you know, if there's intervention that's needed. Because when you're teaching phonics, you're using all of those kind of, you know, they're using their voice, they need to use, you know, speaking and listening, they need to use their fine motor skills, they need to recall and retrieve things, and it's daily. So it's a really good way to kind of look at children and think, okay, you're really struggling, you know, there might be a working memory issue here, or when you're picking up pens and pencils, we're looking at hand grip, but you're really, really struggling with that, or your pronunciation, you know, is a bit off and you're not being able to form certain sounds. You know, is there a tongue tie there? You're struggling to see the board. And it's all those basic things like, can they hear? Like they might need a hearing check, or they might need to go to opticians, or they might need to go back to the doctor and look at tongue placement, you know, and all of those things can be picked up really early. And if they're not picked up, you know, we've had some children that have come to us and they're tongue tied and they're at the end of key stage 1. And you think, this child has had difficulties from reception, it hasn't been picked up, then they've kind of struggled to communicate, then that's kind of turned into a frustration, that's turned into a behavioural issue, and then you end up dealing with the behaviour issue and not the actual problem that it has manifested itself into that. And so it's always kind of taking a step back and thinking, okay, we've ticked all these boxes to check that all of these things that are fixable can be fixed. And now we can look at the child again and see if there are, you know, has that kind of supported that child into making progress? Are they now going to carry on with their educational journey and not have these issues? Or is there another underlying issue that we now need to pursue? So I think that's why it's so important.
Thinking about my career and thinking about the specific pupils, I'll not dox any of them on the podcast, but yeah, if you get to key stage 2 and it has sort of manifested as a behavioral issue because of sort of really pent up frustration, yeah, it just makes so much sense, you know, deal with it just like you would with any situation, and you avoid sort of a lot of upset, don't you?
Yeah, and I think there's a danger that people think, well, of course I've thought about that. Yeah. The amount of SENCOs that get frustrated when someone says, have you thought about using a visual timetable? You think, yeah, of course I've thought about that. But actually, things like hearing and sight and all of those basic things that you need to function well at that age, you know, children can't say, well, I can't hear properly. No, that they might be aware of it, but they might not be something that they verbalize, and they don't know that they can't see the board. Yeah. So actually, just by getting, whether they might be absolutely fine, but just in case. We had a child years ago that we were saying, well, there is an issue there, there is a real issue there, and we can't work out what it is. We always just had a kind of standard kind of checklist at that point, like, let's just check these things off. And they took her to the doctor, and they said her ears are completely blocked, completely. And within the space of about a month, they had to medicate her, and they had to kind of do a couple of procedures, and that child was completely transformed in the space of 6 weeks. And I thought, we could have been here for years saying that she's got this issue and this issue and this issue. Actually, it's something quite simple, and that child was completely transformed within 6 weeks. You think that wasn't a special educational need, that was a medical need that could have completely gone undetected, really. So yeah, I think that's why reception teachers are just phenomenal, because they pick things up really quickly like that. And we've been really lucky. But I know that, you know, it feels silly, and that's, you know, you feel silly saying, have you thought about? But I don't think there were any silly questions, really.
No, it's better to feel silly than to feel remorse or regret further down the line. You know, the fact that you didn't say something. I think some of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, it's not acting. I should have done something, or should have said something, and you know, would have avoided a headache down the line. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
And if you had to condense your approach to special educational needs into a set of guiding principles, what would they be? I
think you just need to become a really bloody good teacher. You need to become a really good teacher, because if you know your children and you sort your behaviour out in your classrooms and you hone your skills at teaching, you then become more aware of those children that might have those additional needs in your class, because you will kind of be able to get through the, you know, I've spoken about this before and said that if the behaviour is not sorted in a classroom, you potentially could say, oh, every child's got some sort of need in here, and actually you might have a child with a sensory need that just can't cope with the noise levels and they might need to leave the classroom, or you get the child that's totally withdrawn because everything is a bit overwhelming in there. And if you don't get things right as a teacher, so that quality first teaching needs to be absolutely a priority. I think there is some kind of merit in observing specialists that come into your school and work with your children, and I think that's really difficult in schools, particularly, I'm going to keep talking about small schools, but I think any school, because even in the bigger school that I worked in, it was still an issue that you'd have specialists coming in and working with children, but you would be teaching in the class, so you wouldn't get those opportunities to see the specialists working with your children. But you might get, you know, a support staff member going in and observing, but as long as someone from that class is observing how the specialists are working with them, I think there are some missed opportunities there, and I think that's really important. And I think leaders in schools and SENCOs need to kind of make that happen. So if you've got a speech and language therapist coming in and working with your children, or you've got occupational therapists, or you've got play therapists or anything like that, possibly not play therapists because it's quite a confidential environment, but even just talking to them about the processes that they use and the strategies that they use could be really, really useful. I think using the time that you've got, I think it also comes from leadership. I think because I've been the head and the SENCO, I kind of see it from both sides. And a teacher, you kind of see that leaders need to look at workload. They need to really look at workload and planning and marking and all of that stuff, and kind of remove as much of that as possible, so that your teachers in the classrooms have got the time to concentrate on those children, those children that have specific need, or they have personalized plans, or they have kind of quite tight interventions, so that the teachers can really see the impact and progress that's being made. There's a real danger that you stick a child into an intervention and you don't have the time to see if it's actually having an impact. And some children can sit in interventions for 12 weeks and it has absolutely no impact on that child, but because you're doing something, you feel kind of okay. Well, I know that they're okay because they're sitting in an intervention. Well, if that intervention is having absolutely no impact, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time, you're using manpower to kind of put that in place. Actually, you'd be better off doing something else. So I think the guiding principles are freeing your time up and using it more directly to kind of look at what's happening in the classroom.
You're singing from my hymn sheet here, because we make so many decisions every day. If we're having to think about stuff that other people have thought about for us, for instance, like you said, like planning, say there was a really well planned and sequenced curriculum, that frees you up to think about other things, like you say, to make sure all pupils are attaining well in subjects, to make sure all pupils are sort of supported as best we can. Without that, I think you spend your time thinking about superficial features of classroom practice, I think. So I'm totally with you on freeing up teacher time. I think that possibly might be one of the best things I've heard on this podcast.
Thank you very much. But I see the difficulties from all sides. Like, as a head, we put in a new curriculum. I personally hate TDaPE. So and particularly for our pupils with SEND, I hate TDaPE, because I fundamentally believe that all children have something, they have a golden thread running through them, that they're good at something. The danger with topic is that you get all this mishmash, and I'm going to talk about topic in the worst possible sense because I've seen some amazing, the disclaimer is I've seen some amazing topics. I've seen some amazing topic work, but I've seen some really, really, really bad topic work, which is a mishmash. It's a bit of history and a bit of geography and a bit of art, and then there's music playing over the top of the classroom while children are scribbling down on whiteboards and having a chat and probably giving each other the worst history lesson in the world. And it becomes this big mishmash, and that child that's sitting there that is really, really struggles with reading and writing and maths, but is incredibly creative, is sitting there thinking, I'm totally overwhelmed by this whole kind of hodgepodge of stuff. And actually, by separating those subjects out, that child has got the opportunity to flourish and to be celebrated and to have this kind of positive experience in school. And that's why I'll always fight the good fight for kind of discrete lessons. And that was one of the things that really transformed our school. We implemented a knowledge-rich curriculum, and I have a music specialist. I had a music, talking in the past tense, I had a music specialist in my school, and he started giving out brass lessons. Some of our children that struggled the most with fine and gross motor started having brass lessons. We had a child with dyspraxia who we just thought that wouldn't be anything that they'd be interested in, and he went to every brass lesson going. And it was that moment where you thought, if we hadn't put that opportunity out there, we would never know. And the same with art. You know, we did a lot of kind of artist studies, and children studied, you know, pieces of art, and they recreated their own pieces of art, and they learnt an awful lot. And we had one child who pretty much through the whole of Key Stage 1 was selective mute, and just was an incredible artist. And she created these pieces of work that actually brought us to tears sometimes, because she'd come into my office and say, I've done this, and she'd open up and talk about it. And I just thought, wow, actually, just by, and you know, it was an incredible amount of work to create this curriculum, and my team worked incredibly hard to make sure that it kind of represented kind of the community that we lived in, but also gave these children a cultural capital outside of their own experience. And we knew that was really important for us, because we're remote and rural, and getting children out and about to have these experiences was more difficult. So we started bringing it into school, and these children, you know, and it wasn't every child, of course not, but there were these kind of key moments over the last sort of 3 or 4 years where these children would just show us what they could do, and it was incredible. And I think that is part, I think that's part of the reason that I don't like topic.
I think that's really, really powerful. In your opinion, what's the single most important thing for teachers to consider when supporting pupils with more complex needs?
Don't assume that children can't do things because they have additional or different needs, and continually raise the bar of what you're expecting. Because when you raise the bar on children, they'll do everything they can to exceed it, show you that you're wrong, and actually and I think, yeah, and don't differentiate. I think differentiation can completely stifle and put a ceiling on kind of your expectations. And just because a child struggles in one particular subject doesn't mean that they're going to struggle in every subject. That is a real issue, where there's this sort of underlying assumption, well, they're not very good at writing, therefore their maths isn't going to be very good. I'm like, how did you come to that conclusion? And why are you giving this child work that they're completing really quickly and then not challenging them to move on? I think that there is some power in this kind of starting every child, starting your teaching with everyone together, and then scaffolding and supporting those children that then kind of get to that point where they think, you've assessed them as, that's the point they've got to where they now need scaffolding and support, and that's where you then put it in. I would say just don't assume that children can't do things.
Yeah, a mutual colleague of ours has actually asked his leadership team to stop using the word differentiation. It is scaffold and challenge is how they articulate, because obviously in maths, I brought in, this is our approach to maths. We had high expectations of everybody, and actually he sort of rolled that out across the general teaching and learning approach, and it makes a lot of sense, because the differentiation that I was told about in 2004 is a whole lot different to what it might mean now. And I think there are shades of healthiness in terms of the different definitions, and certainly the one where you have to make 6 different activities for 6 different groups starting at P levels and level 5 is certainly, it's not helpful.
I think it's really easy to become quite sneery about things that had happened previously and say, oh, it's ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous that we have to do this. I could waffle on about APP files that I used to have to lug around and highlight and date. You have to date it 3 times and highlight it off to show that this child had done, even though you knew full well they could use full stops and capital letters. Why am I having to then go through their book and evidence it and date it? And, that it seems insane now. At the time I was like, yeah, this is me proving that I'm having an impact, and therefore, and that's what my leadership team want. They want me to prove that I'm a good teacher, and that's what I'm going to have to do. And it's the same with differentiation. We had a planning grid with 6 boxes, and I think there was a box that said SEN and then lower ability, and it was like, oh god. And you look back and I cringe now, and I think, oh my god, and I was writing children's names in these boxes, and then because the workload was so huge, you just basically photocopy that page, and those children would never move from those boxes. And then you'd get to the end and you'd do a kind of assessment paper at the end, particularly in year 2, where they were just assessed continuously every 6 weeks. You'd just shove an assessment paper in them, and you think, I haven't even taught that. The workload is so huge and the curriculum is massive, and I haven't even taught that. So why am I even giving them an assessment paper where I know they're absolutely going to bomb it? No one is going to move from these boxes. And you just then handed that class up, and these children never move from these imaginary boxes. And but then you kind of, fast forward, these children got their GCSEs, they got their A levels, so what were we doing? But at the time, that's kind of what the landscape looked like. That's what, I think learning styles has a lot to answer for, and kind of, children wearing weird hats in different coloured hats, and and we would group these children. We did some really odd things, but we've learned an awful lot since then, and we will continue to do that. And I'm sure that we'll probably listen to this in 5 years and think, what the hell were we talking about then as well? It's happening, we're shifting so quickly, and everyone kind of, their mindsets need to shift as quickly. And I can hand on heart say we've not always got it right, but I think the intention to support children has always been there. We want all children to succeed. We want all children to do really well. So I think it always came from a good place, but it was just a bit misguided back then.
Yeah, like you said, probably misguided now too. But sneering about how things used to be is the whole premise of this podcast. I lost my heart of teaching, so I feel a deep resentment to all those.
I'm clinging on to mine. I'm clinging on.
Yeah. So in reference to the principles you outlined earlier, what might these look like in practice in a school that's doing a particularly good job of supporting their pupils with special educational needs?
when you walk into a school that's inclusive, there's a certain positivity that you feel. And I know that's probably going to upset people, because when Ofsted visits schools and they're looking for outstanding, they can just feel it, apparently. But I do think that there is a certain feel of a school where everyone has a voice. And I always question, if I walk into a school and there is a child sitting outside of the classroom in the corridor, I will always question that. And that probably annoys people. And there's probably a perfectly legitimate reason. But I think if a child's sitting outside in a corridor at a table and they're working and they're probably with an adult, I think, why can't that child be in that classroom? And that is always a good indicator to me as to what kind of school that is. Because if they've got perfectly legit, oh, well, the rest of the, this child was off school for a day and they need to catch up and they're doing an assessment paper and they need it to be quiet and everyone else is doing, they're doing a music lesson or something, that makes perfect sense. I think that when I started working at my previous school, the inclusive nature wasn't there. And we had children from all year groups with special educational needs working in a room with a TA. And the reason for that is because the behaviour in the rest of the school was on its knees. And that decision was made with good intention, that actually those children then get the opportunity to work in a room that's quiet and that they can get on with their work and they can be supported by an adult. And that was a real wake-up call to me, that actually, if you don't get the culture right in your school, you are on the road to a really unhappy place, a really unhappy school. The children aren't happy, the staff aren't happy, and you kind of lose your vision and your purpose. And I think all teachers and support staff and anyone working in schools, they work in schools because they want to see the best for children, and that has to come from the leadership's vision, and that has to be communicated to everyone. I think in schools that are inclusive, I think everyone has a voice, and there isn't that kind of reluctance to put your hand up and ask a question or to answer a question, and no one feels silly, even if it's the wrong answer, and everyone has a go, and there's a supportiveness, and that can come from understanding different children's needs within the classroom. So we've had some circumstances where the parents have said, we want other children to know that this child, our child has this need, and we want that to be communicated so that everyone kind of understands that that's why they do certain things, or that's why they react to certain things. So really, really good schools will work really closely with their parents and that specific child, and everyone in that school will know, okay, this child really struggles when we do this, so that's why they need support or scaffolding, or that's why we work in a certain way with that child. And there's this kind of mutual respect and compassion and empathy that is built on those kind of circumstances. So I think that's what you would see. And I think that's why it's so important.
No mean feat either. That takes a lot of, like you say, an organisation. It comes right down from the very top, and it filters down and permeates everything that's happening in school, isn't it?
It takes a really long time, and actually you have to constantly justify why you're doing it. And it's only once you get there that people say, I get it now. I understand why we spent so long working on that, or why you constantly repeat your expectations over and over again, and why you're fighting that fight, and why you're, trying to get resources or people into the building to support these children, or why you are, part of our appraisal system is that you will kind of work, you've got children, you might have children with dyslexia in your classroom, and part of your appraisal, through discussion and agreement, that you're going to find out about how to support those children. Or you've got children with speech, language and communication difficulties, and we're going to put professional development in place to upskill you so that you can be an advocate and a champion for those children. And the next class that comes up, you are undoubtedly going to have another child with another specific need, and you want your teachers and your support staff invested in learning and developing themselves so that they can become advocates and champions for those children, because then that culture, it becomes a catalyst for that culture and that inclusive culture that you build. And it's a wonderful thing when you get there, and you're never quite there because you don't know who's walking through the door next and what kind of adjustments you're going to need to make. But because everyone is on the same page, it creates this kind of nurturing, holistic kind of environment. It's absolutely integral for academic progress, because those children feel that they can take those risks and that they can make mistakes, and their peers, together are going to support them. There's been a couple of times where I've walked into a classroom and a child's given the wrong answer, and their classmate next to them has patted them on the back. It's all right. And I just think that's it. Like, if we can distill those moments, or a child's got up and they've read something out and they've struggled a bit, and their classmates help them, with a bit of reading, or they're given this kind of spontaneous little clap at the end of something that a child's done, and that they know that child's worked really incredibly hard to do. And those moments are the ones where you think, yeah, we've got this culture right.
And are there any pitfalls that schools should try to avoid?
I think going back to that, the feeling that you're not doing enough. Teachers have got that terrible guilt. Maybe it's just me. But I always feel like I should be doing more. And I know teachers and support staff feel that are we doing enough? Are we doing the right thing? And I think that if you feel like that, if you feel like, am I doing the right thing? Then ask, are we doing the right thing for this child? Are we seeing an impact of what we're doing? And if we're not, what are we going to do to change it? Not just go with the flow, not just go, well, this is what I've been told to do, so this is what I'm going to do. If you don't feel like it's the right thing, then say something. And also, if you've got concerns about a child that hasn't been brought up by the parents or by the SENCO, or, speak and say something.
Would you say that on a head teacher level as well? So, for instance, if you don't think that the necessary bodies are making the interventions that they need to, would you ask them to speak up as well?
Yeah, I think head teachers have a really difficult job. Not just saying that because I've been one, but you need to reflect on what your offer is. And you've got things like mainstream core standards, which is kind of the universal offer that you should be kind of giving to children in a mainstream classroom before you kind of go down a specialist route. But if that isn't working, I think there is a difficulty. There is a kind of expectation that you wait and you wait and you wait. Sometimes you've got to get to a point where you think, I'm not waiting any longer. I'm going to kind of get what this child needs. And I think I've been guilty of kind of thinking, well, we'll give them a bit more time. We'll give them a bit more time. We'll give them a bit more time. And time goes incredibly quickly, particularly in schools. And actually just flag it up as soon as you start thinking, okay, this isn't having an impact, and we're putting all this support in place and it's still not having an impact, and I think we need kind of some specialist advice. Just do it. And head teachers can get bogged down with everything else that they have to do. And I think that's why, if I could go back, I think separating the SENCO and the leadership role would have been kind of better for me, because I end up finding myself in this conflict, like internal conflict of saying, okay, we've got to think about the needs of the whole school, and then we've got to think about the needs of these individuals. And that's quite a combative environment for one person to have. So I think finding someone else to kind of challenge you and question you and your decisions is incredibly important.
Yeah, that must have been quite an internal battle.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah, some of the best head teachers in SENCOs I've worked with have been really tenacious in their pursuit of making sure all the pupils get the best deal they can. And, you know, I think they have that healthy respect where they can challenge each other and sort of push things forward, because everybody, like you say, everybody has different ideas, different opinions, and it's about what's best for the children day to day, isn't it?
Yeah, I've surrounded myself with people that always challenge me, and that's exhausting sometimes, but I think I quite like that. I think I'm never happier than when I'm discussing education and kind of policy and strategy, and you know, and people are sort of, even just a question, why did you make that decision? And I think, oh, and it raises my anxiety, and then I think this is what I need. Like, people need that. When you're making decisions that ultimately affect other people's lives, you must be challenged and you must reflect on kind of decision making. Luckily, you know, and actually through Twitter, I've met some people, and I have a good group of professionals around me that will challenge me, not, you know, pretty much on everything, not just education. They will challenge me on everything, but I really admire and appreciate that, and I'm never happier than having an argument about education and discussing the landscape and the research and the ideas, and you know, and you know, like we were talking about earlier, you know, it's really easy to look back and sneer at things that decisions that we made, but I think I don't think at that point there was the environment, there was enough people challenging. I think we were working in silos, and now we've kind of opened up this environment that allows people to go to conferences and challenge each other, and allows people to probe research and ask, you know, how many people were actually asked when this research was created, and actually is it representative of what we're working in? And you know, you do have social media to kind of, you know, it's quite nuanced, isn't it? But you know, you do have those opportunities to then, you know, say, actually, can we open up this discussion? Can we actually have a discussion more widely than 140 characters or whatever it is? And I think that's a great place to be.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think, yeah, it definitely feels different from, you know, from the world that when I first heard about research ed and the world we're in now. It feels very different. It feels, you know, I know we're a very small sort of bubble, or the 5% of teachers who are on Twitter, but you know, I think the conversations are extending beyond. You know, certainly in the schools that I visit, people are having the conversations that might have been had maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
I come into contact with a lot of people that aren't on Twitter, which is, thank goodness, but they're having the same conversations. Yeah, Twitter is a very small group of professionals, but I think using it as a springboard to open those conversations up and to question people outside of that, it kind of gives you a bit more confidence to say, okay, so I've read this research paper, I've read this blog, you know, we're looking at this book, we've been listening to these podcasts, we've attended these conferences, we're getting a much wider picture of kind of issues and ideas, and I think that that's got to be better than what was before, and I think it's important.
Tell me about your new role. You know, what's the aim of it? What will it look like day to day? And what are your ambitions as you embark on this exciting new journey?
It is really exciting. So the official title is Inclusion Executive Officer, which sounds really big and scary.
Does it? Sounds impressive.
It's a new role, so I'm not taking over from anyone, and it's a newly established role. And actually, the reason that I took it was because I just think that if you've got a trust that having created a role, an executive role for inclusion, that's the kind of trust I want to work for. Because I don't think many trusts have that role. overseeing inclusion across 10 schools, so 10 primary mainstream schools. They're spread across Kent, and it's a newly established trust. So it's it was a trust of 4 schools, and they've taken on 6 schools from a different academy, and then they've come together as a group of 10 schools. So it was only officially brought together at the beginning of this year. So it is actually a new trust, and the CEO is very visionary, and he is wholly committed to inclusion. That includes kind of pupils with SEND, different communities. It's looking at kind of attendance. It's looking at inclusive practice. It's looking at CPD. So it's a whole host of different things. And I think my first kind of job is to go and get to know the schools, get to know what they look like, get to know what they feel like. The head teachers are an amazing bunch of people. They're already kind of committed to inclusion, which is great. And I think that we can do some really good work. Ideally, I think we would like the trust to be known for its inclusive practice, and kind of that sharing of good practice across those 10 schools. And I've also been given a kind of another job, which I haven't really told anyone about. So here you go. It's a system lead of education, and I didn't realise at the time that it was going to be a national lead of education. So it's inclusion lead of education, and it's going to be working to support the peer-to-peer reviews that Kent are currently doing. So Kent have started working with NASEN and Elsie, and they're going to be doing peer-to-peer reviews across Kent in hubs. So I've taken on that role as well, which is great. I didn't realise how huge the role was until I got it, and then they said, "Oh, it's the same as an NLE," and I was like, "Oh, wow, okay." So that's going to be really good. So it means that I can go and see and support other schools outside of the trust, and then I can bring kind of that practice into the trust and also share kind of what we're doing with other schools. So it'll be really exciting, a really exciting role. So yeah, I think I'm going to be busy.
Nice. And so can any of us who are based in Kent expect to see you in our schools over the next 6-7 months?
Are you signed up to do the peer-to-peer reviews? Probably, yeah.
I imagine they probably are. You know, my head's quite proactive in that way. So
yeah, I think there's a few of us, and I've been put with schools across the marsh. So it's schools that I'm familiar with, because before I got that role, I didn't realise that I'd be getting the role at all. I didn't make any assumptions about it. And I set up a group of schools. So we've got a couple of schools that are in my trust, and then we've got a couple of schools in Folkestone, a secondary school, a pupil referral unit. And I thought it'd be really good to get those schools together so that they could see how different sectors and phases worked. So from, you know, we've got a school with a nursery all the way to kind of sixth form, including a PRU, and so that we can spend time in each other's schools and having a look at kind of what does inclusive practice look like here, and how can we improve that, and what is the reality of a PRU, and how, you know, what happens if things fail at secondary school, or what happens if, you know, we don't get the right provision in primary, and it's looking at the journey of some of our children and our most vulnerable children, and actually what can we do at each phase to make it better. So that was really exciting. I set all of that up, and then they said, "Oh, you've got this job, so you're gonna be working with schools in Dover." I was like, I'd really like to work with these schools. And they're like, "Okay, well, we'll move you around so I can carry on working with those schools." So I think it'll be a really worthwhile piece of work.
It's been wonderful talking with you about special education leads today. I think hopefully the first of a few chats. You know, but it'd be particularly interesting to see in 12 months' time how your role has developed and whether or not it matched up with your ambitions. Is there anything before we finish that you think teachers should read, listen to, or any final advice, you know, for those who are feeling energized and ready to improve their practice?
I think the Research Ed book on SEN, on special educational needs, not because I've written a chapter of it, but I think it's a really good starting point. It's not a particularly long book. It's broken down into specific areas. It gives advice on kind of one-page profiles and personalised plans and kind of experiences for SENCOs. And I think that's a really good kind of starting place if you have a vested interest in that. The work of Gareth Morwood, David Bartram, Mark Rowland, the EEF have done some amazing research projects that they started across Kent, actually, and I think that they've rolled out to other places, or maybe it rolled out to other places and then came to Kent, but they were doing kind of work around special educational needs and research projects that you can do in your schools, and also characteristics of deprivation, because that kind of goes hand in hand with kind of vocabulary, kind of interventions that you can put in whole school that have a huge impact. There's also just making use of your specialists in your areas and sharing the good practice and networking with them. And I would also say, don't be intimidated by kind of asking questions. And I've probably said this repeatedly, but just ask the questions and challenge those kind of decisions and look at your interventions and what's going on, and kind of read up yourself as well. But you've got incredible people working around you all the time that you probably don't even know about, and they are there and willing to answer any questions that you've got, and they are actively excited when you say, how can I help this child? You know, they genuinely, and I know for a fact they genuinely like, yes, someone is asking about how to support those children, and that, you know, and that's what they're there for. You're surrounded, I guarantee you're surrounded by people that want to help. It's really important to know that small changes can make a big difference. So even just those small little things that you can do in your class to support all of your children will make a huge difference. So find some decent blogs, find some decent ideas. Twitter is a good, you know, even if you don't want to kind of participate in Twitter, actually just using a couple of hashtags, you can find some really good articles and blogs and papers. So just continue to be an advocate and a champion for your pupils.
Nice. I've heard lots of good things about your chapter in the Research Ed book about special educational needs, and I think I've read 3 of the series, and they've all been really high quality. So I've no doubt that it's definitely worth checking out. You know, even if you're going to be modest about, you know, your contribution to it. You know, because I heard your talk at Research Ed Surrey was fantastic. You know, 3 people on separate occasions have told me how much they enjoyed that talk. So, you know, I think if that's anything to go by, you know, then that chapter should be essential reading if anyone's interested in this.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Thank you.
But I know you've obviously got to shoot off to get boosted. So all I said to this, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fascinating, and look forward to talking to you about it in the future.
Thank you very much for asking me. It's been great. Thank you.